for the invitation, Denise. I'm very grateful, and I'm very grateful to be doing this amongst friends in such a nice venue and such a relaxed atmosphere.
Yeah.
So, tonight I want to talk about 5G and why we should be worried about it. But once I've finished shocking you about 5G, then we want to look at the solutions. So my colleague Steve is going to do us a presentation about some solutions. We have Mike Cavalli's channel suggestions. And then hopefully, I hope that at least some of you will stay so that we can have a discussion. Because this is not just about me, it's about all of us and how we can confront this problem and stop it. And as Denise said, I'm very confident that we are going to stop it. So let me tell you, just to inspire you before I start talking about horrible 5G, let me tell you that with somebody in the United States, Arthur Furstenberg, we put together an appeal called the International Appeal to Stop 5G on Earth and in Space. And that appeal, we calculate, has now reached millions. We cannot get into the mainstream media because, of course, the mainstream media is completely controlled and completely pro-5G. But nevertheless, we know that by now we have reached millions of people. And so if we've been able to do that over the last 9 months, then I figure once we all start working together, I'm quite confident that we will stop this. So let me start then on my presentation. 5G is the biggest biological experiment in human history. Why? Because it's a completely new technology and it has never been tested for health or safety. So that means that we are all guinea pigs in this experiment. So in this presentation, I'm going to be covering 10 points. These are the points I'm going to cover. We're going to look at the international appeal. We're going to discuss the fact that there's been no public debate. We're going to look at regulatory capture, so we're going to look at the bodies that should be protecting us and are not. We're going to talk about the difference between 5G and 4G, so it is very different, a totally different technology. And we're going to talk about the fact that electromagnetic radiation is extremely dangerous, and this is established science. We're going to also look at the issue of electro hypersensitivity, because a lot of people have already been affected by electromagnetic radiation, and it's likely that an awful lot more people will start to be affected once 5G comes on stream. We're going to look at the nature of 5G infrastructure. We're going to talk about the satellites, because it's proposed to beam 5G also from space. And we're going to talk about the global electric circuit of the Earth and how that will be affected. And then finally we'll look at the fact that rolling out 5G is actually completely illegal in international law. So first of all, the Stop 5G Space Appeal. We have a website. Currently we have 48,000 or 48,000 plus signatories, and there are 750 organizations that have signed and thousands of scientists and doctors. And anybody can sign. So we've opened this up for everybody to sign. So please, if you support this, please do go and sign the appeal. I'd just like to say about the appeal that I'm not actually greatly in sympathy with the idea of an appeal, strangely, because I don't think we can look to the authorities to stop this, actually, not unless we put pressure on them. So we have to actually take action to stop this. So yes, please sign the appeal, because that shows your support for the appeal, but we also need you to go out and take action. So in the appeal, we have 23 languages. We also have German. So we state that we believe that 5G is a threat to all life on Earth. So how do we know that so many people have seen the appeal? Because we know that people have reposted it on their websites, they've reposted it on Twitter, on Facebook, and in recent weeks we've had coverage from RT America, which is mainstream television, and they've done 2 specific pieces on our appeal, and they've done 2 more pieces generally on 5G. 2 years ago, they had viewers to the tune of about 70 million people per week. I don't know currently how many viewers they have. But even this YouTube version has been seen by 1.3 million people. So this is Annie Sastro, who did a piece on French television, French international television, TV5 Monde. She was explaining about our appeal, and she collects signatures also for the appeal in Europe. And that had 51,000 views just on, I think that was Twitter. At the beginning of the year, in January, there was a newspaper in Britain, the Daily Star, which is a fairly minor newspaper. I would not describe it as one of the big, serious newspapers. But nevertheless, they have a circulation of 340,000 people, and they have covered our appeal twice. And interestingly, we have watched that now go out across the world. So we know it's being discussed in other countries, and questions are being asked about what my partner said in this interview in lots of countries. And we also appeared, for example, on DocCheck News, which I believe has a circulation of 1.25 million. And these are medical professionals in Germany. Now, there's been no public debate on 5G, as you may have noticed. Most people have not even heard about 5G. When I approach people to talk about 5G, they've never even heard about it. What you find when you go and look at the UN, the EU, what governments are saying, it's all pro-5G. 5G is just wonderful, and there's never a counter-argument about why we might wish to be concerned about it. So there's never been a public debate, and there should be. But in the absence of public debate, then it's up to us to organise evenings like this and to inform each other. So we're asking you to each one teach one. This is the responsibility that we have, to actually go person to person and explain 5G. Why do I say that? You have to bring your conviction, your integrity, and your authenticity to another person to convince them. This is not an argument that's going to be won by simply sending links and sending information for people to read. The problem here is cognitive dissonance. When you go to somebody, as I do very frequently, for me, my mantra is every day is a 5G day. So I take my cards everywhere, and in the supermarket, even when I go for a walk, if I ever go for a walk these days, then I will tell people about 5G. And people simply can't believe it. How can you believe that your government is rolling out something which is an existential threat to all life on Earth? So you can only do that in a person-to-person conversation and bring your conviction to it. So we have, when you look at the documents from the EU, from the US, and from other countries, you see the same language being used across all the documents. And one of the things you see is they all talk about a barrier-free regulatory environment. The idea is to remove all the possible barriers to rolling out 5G. So, for example, in the United States, they prohibit local authorities from enforcing environmental laws, they remove local planning procedures, and they are raising limits on exposure to electromagnetic radiation. They're also eliminating public notice requirements and public hearings, and they've actually passed laws to make it illegal for local authorities to take scientific testimony into account. So in the US, in 1996, President Clinton signed the US Telecommunications Act, and you cannot talk about damage to the environment or injury to health. And this, again, people find extremely hard to believe. If you experience 5G and you have experienced damage to the environment or damage to your health, this is not the basis for bringing a legal case against the people rolling out 5G. You cannot bring this as evidence because of this. So a judge will throw out what you have to say. You will not be able to bring this as evidence, which is very hard for people to believe. You have regulatory agencies. So there are various agencies that are supposed to regulate the public exposure to electromagnetic radiation in order to protect the public. So one such is called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Now, it's called ICNIRP. What is ICNIRP? They brought out regulations, so-called safety guidelines. There are no legal limits on exposure to electromagnetic radiation. All we have is guidelines, which are not legal limits. And in any case, these guidelines are set so high that industry could never exceed them. Now, this so-called International Commission is actually a Verein under German law. It's a Verein. And because you are Austrian, you understand what a Verein is. It's a club. So if I want to start a Verein, I can go and register myself as the International Commission, which sounds terribly grand. But all this is a club that appoints its own members and excludes anybody who may have a contrary view. And in recent weeks, there was an article, well, actually several articles across Europe, but there was an article published in Der Tagesspiegel in Germany, and they were exposing the conflicts of interest in this so-called International Commission. So you have, in the regulatory environment, you have what I call the merry-go-round. So if you, as an individual, approach any authority that should be protecting you, and you write them a letter or an email and say, well, you know, what about 5G? I hear that it's very dangerous. They will write you a letter and they will cite ICNIRP. We rely on ICNIRP guidelines. And if those guidelines change, then we will change what we are doing. And they're all doing this. So you have the World Health Organization, which accepts this club's so-called safety guidelines verbatim, unquestioning, and they take them and cite them. You have the International Telecommunications Union, which is also part of the UN, again taking these so-called guidelines verbatim, without question, and so on and so forth. So we should really be questioning who is governing all of this activity, and really we should be questioning why we're not being protected. So how did we get into this situation? We got into the situation through what we call regulatory capture, where industry has captured the regulatory agencies, principally the Federal Communications Commission in the US, which is completely, it's like a revolving door where the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission will be regularly somebody directly coming from industry. And when they finished leading the Federal Communications Commission, they will go back to industry again. So they're only serving the interests of industry. So how did we get into this situation? It's based on a lie. And the lie is that electromagnetic radiation, or your mobile phone, only has thermal effects, only has heating effects. Now, the testing of mobile phones, I tried to find you a picture, I couldn't find one, but the testing of mobile phones is not done on a human being, thank goodness. It's actually done on a mannequin. So they have a mannequin head, and it's filled with gel, and they put a probe inside the head. Then they take a mobile phone and they strap the mobile phone to this mannequin head, and there is a spacer. So a spacer. So there's something in between, so that the mobile phone does not touch the head. There's actually a spacer, and then they measure only the heating effect inside this gel. So they do not test for biological effects. And they deny that there are any biological effects.
What would be a biological effect?
I'll come to that in a minute, because there are biological effects and it's very well known. So what I have here is an image of what happens to your head when you put a mobile phone to your head. So yes, you are cooking your head, and this is the same frequency as a microwave oven. So 4G uses 2.4 gigahertz, which is the same as a microwave oven. So in effect, what you have with wireless technology is you are constantly living in an environment where you have microwave ovens with the door open. So you're completely unprotected from it. So, biological effects. How do we know that there are biological effects? Well, there are tens of thousands of studies talking about biological effects. These studies go right back to 1932 and even before that. So we have tens of thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies talking about the biological effects. A lot of the research was done in the Soviet Union, which is why traditionally the Soviet Union had much stricter limits on exposure to electromagnetic radiation than we did in the West. And even now I think they're still stricter, but I think they're also rolling out 5G. Now the American military, to my knowledge, the American military brought out at least 3 reviews of the biological effects. In order to develop weapons, they wanted to know what the biological effects were. So they commissioned consultants to go to the literature and compile reports reviewing those biological effects. So these are just a few examples of some of them. And one I know of reviews 5,000 studies. So even these military compendiums are showing you, proving that there are thousands of studies. So this one is from 1994, this is the Air Force, and they're talking about the biological effects. Damage to major organs, disruption of important biological processes, and the potential risk of cancer. So they're telling you, black and white. Here's another one, another Air Force report. This is from 2012. The fact that EMF exposure influences cells, enzyme activity and genes has been shown under certain conditions, frequency, signal shape and intensity. However, it is still unclear whether any of these effects actually influence human health. It's not true. We've established it now. Here's another one. This is from 1971. This was put together by a man called Zori Glaser, I believe, who went on to produce several reviews, in the end reviewing a total of 5,000 plus reports. So, why should we be worried about 5G when we already live with 4G? I like to explain this in terms of 4G being a soup. So we now live with wireless technology. It was chosen some years ago. It was decided that it was cheaper. Rather than giving people connections, it was decided by industry that it was cheaper to roll out wireless technology. So with 4G, you've had several generations. You've had the second generation, third generation, fourth generation, which is 4G, and now we have the fifth generation. So because you have a continuity of these names, people of course think that the fifth generation is just more of the fourth generation. So it's just more of the same thing, but it functions a lot better. This is not true. In fact, the fifth generation is a completely new technology. So if you think of 4G as a soup, 5G comes more like a laser. Why do I say that? It's because you'll be aware that if you take notice of electromagnetic radiation and wireless signals, you'll be aware that in the distance, you will always see a cell tower somewhere in the distance for 4G. But with 5G, they're going to put not a single antenna, but they're going to use banks of antennas. These are called phased arrays. So you have a bank of antennas, and you can have, in one box, you can have even up to 1,000 tiny antennas, or even more than that. And what a phased array does is it turns the signal. So if you think of 4G going out like this, 5G, you're concentrating the signal into a beam. So it becomes a beam, and it's like a laser. With a normal signal, it attenuates over distance, so it becomes weaker over distance. But 5G does not, it's more like a laser, and it maintains its strength over distance. They are rolling out 5G because they want to have something called the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things means that everything in your home would have an RFID chip. So these RFID chips can now be printed, just like a barcode, they can now be printed. So everything, virtually everything you own would have its own RFID chip. And you would not be able to avoid it because your packet of crisps at the supermarket, your orange carton, whatever you buy, it's always going to have the RFID chip. Your baby's nappies will have an RFID chip. So the idea is that you have beams that will punch their way through the walls of your house to reach all these Internet of Objects things. And then the beam will have to come back again to report what's happening with these objects in your home. So you can imagine that, I should mention that 5G represents a densification of infrastructure. So as I said, with 4G you may see a cell phone mast in the distance, but with 5G you're going to have these banks of antennas. Approximately every third house will have this bank of antennas outside the house, and these will punch their way through your wall and into your home. So in your home, you will have these beams coming at you from everywhere, back and forth. Now, the lie is that there are no biological effects. So even if you have these beams coming at you, they say that the skin does not absorb this radiation. This is a lie. We have evidence from research carried out in Israel, which says that, in fact, your skin consists of sweat glands. So you have millions of sweat glands in your skin, and each sweat gland is a helical antenna which takes this radiation, picks it up, and re-radiates it deep into the body, where it causes absolute devastation of all sorts, including damaging DNA. So these are some of the effects, where you have an enormous rise in cataract operations now. And this is likely to be far worse with 5G. 5G also, because it uses millimeter waves, so 4G used microwaves, but 5G uses millimeter waves, which are much shorter than microwaves, and these resonate with insects. Now, you will see a lot of reports in the media about the tremendous loss of insects over the last 20 years. So it's estimated that we've lost about 80% of our insects already. But what you won't see in the mainstream media is anything about electromagnetic radiation, because we all know it's completely safe, so it could not be responsible for killing all the insects. Unfortunately it is, but they won't mention it. There was a recent report about absolute devastation of insects in Puerto Rico, and this was attributed to global warming. But nobody mentioned that there's a huge radar station right next to this rainforest where all the insects suddenly died. So I now see the world through this lens of electromagnetic radiation. And once you're aware of this factor, you see that lots of our problems, our health problems and our environmental problems, are in fact attributable to electromagnetic radiation. So, as I said, we have over 10,000, at least 10,000, peer-reviewed scientific studies that demonstrate harm to human health and the environment. There was a report I saw recently coming out of Germany, one of the EMF organizations that sort of monitors EMFs, electromagnetic fields. They put out a report with lots of photographs of what happens to trees when exposed to wireless technology. And you can see this for yourself. When you have a tree that one side of it, there may be an antenna nearby, you will see that that side of the tree has died. And you look around Vienna, you will see it. The trees next to the houses where the houses are using Wi-Fi, which they're all using Wi-Fi, and you will see that the tree has died on that side. It's very visible. Electromagnetic radiation is a primary cause of cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. This we know, it's been established. And biological effects occur even at near zero power levels. So it's not just a question of high power levels. Again, the difference between 4G and 5G is that 4G operates around 2.4 gigahertz. 5G is going to use, 5G actually encompasses a lot of different technologies. It's not just a single thing. But 5G is going to use frequencies right up to 60 gigahertz and beyond. But we know already, even at very low power levels, we know that there are biological effects. So we can only extrapolate, because there are no health or safety studies on 5G, we can only extrapolate from what we know about the devastation caused by 4G to imagine that with 5G bringing us 100 times the intensity, at least, compared to 4G, we know that it will be devastating. The other thing about it is that it's pulsed. So we have people in Austria who are combating smart meters. So 5G and smart meters, this is pulsed electromagnetic radiation. Now, to some degree, one can imagine that if the body is exposed to a toxin, the body will always try to stay in homeostasis. So the body will adapt. The body cannot adapt to pulsations. And even our famous International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, even they, in their 1998 so-called safety guidelines, admitted that pulsations are extremely dangerous and are much more likely to cause biological effects. Electro hypersensitivity. I have a friend, a Swedish friend, who was living just outside Vienna, and in Vienna they rolled out 5G, they announced 5G at the Rathausplatz on the 19th of November. And then after that, they announced 5G at the airport, or pre-5G at the airport. And we know that Seestadt at Espern is Austria's smart city. There is an EU action plan, because this agenda comes from above, and there is an EU action plan which requests countries, each country, to establish a smart city. And Seestadt is Austria's smart city. So all the new homes there, and I believe that they're all new homes, big blocks, they will have smart meters, because new buildings are all, they install smart meters in all new buildings. And Seestadt will also have self-driving buses. This is planned for Seestadt. So just a brief excursion on self-driving vehicles. Self-driving vehicles will have a form of radar on the top of the vehicle in order for the vehicle to see what is happening and what actions the vehicle needs to take. So this is self-driving cars, self-driving buses, and self-driving trains. And this is called LiDAR, which is somewhat similar to radar. And it is said, in fact it's acknowledged, I was looking at an article the other day, that at certain frequencies, if this signal, if you're driving in your car and you have your rear view mirrors, If you catch that signal in one of your mirrors and it hits your eye, it will blind you at certain frequencies. So this is one really dangerous aspect of self-driving vehicles. The other very tragic aspect of self-driving vehicles is that you're going to need that signal to be a continuous signal. So if you have a self-driving bus or a self-driving train, you cannot have that signal drop because you need it to be continuous. What prevents the signal from being continuous? Well, these signals are blocked by trees. There's a report from the University of Surrey 5G Innovation Centre which tells you that a tree blocks this signal to the tune of 70%. In other words, the trees have to go. If you want 5G, you can't have your trees. And so what do you see happening in Britain? You see at least 2 towns in Britain that started chopping down thousands of healthy trees. And there were big protests. Of course, nobody knew why they were chopping down the trees. Yeah, they said, oh, we have to chop them down because some of them are diseased. Or, and they started chopping down all these trees until they were stopped. But in each place, they did succeed in chopping down about 6,000 trees before the public stopped them. You also, in Britain, there's a government agency which is responsible for the railway lines. So the railways in Britain are privatised, but the government still owns the railway lines. So you have a big network of railway lines all over the country. And a few months ago, they announced that they were going to chop down millions of trees all along the railway lines in Britain. And there was a big public outcry because they'd said it publicly. They didn't just do it secretly, but they actually said it publicly. There was a big outcry, so they had to withdraw their plan. So obviously they will rethink and then try to do it without people noticing. So, electro hypersensitivity. So, if you're unfortunate enough to have a smart meter installed in your home, or if you're unfortunate enough to be in Seychelles, where they have what's called massive MIMO antennas, which is a massive antenna putting out a huge signal to cover a vast area, then you stand a very high chance of becoming electro-hypersensitive. We estimate that there are at least 20 million people who are already electro-hypersensitive, possibly as many as 100 million worldwide. I have to check the figure, but I think it's possibly about 3% of people who are already electro-hypersensitive, and I am one of them. Compared to a lot of people, my symptoms are fairly mild, but it does mean that I have to be very careful. My computer is cabled, I don't have a mobile phone, my Wi-Fi router is always switched off, so I take care not to expose myself to electromagnetic radiation. I no longer travel on the U-Bahn, because everybody on the U-Bahn, I would say, at least every second person is holding a mobile phone. The same on the trams in Vienna. So I don't go on the trams and I don't go on the U-Bahn anymore because I don't want to be exposed to it. In addition, if you're in a metal-walled vehicle, so the metal walls prevent you from receiving a good signal, especially if you're on the U-Bahn. Yeah? So it's very difficult for your mobile phone to receive the signal. So what happens if it has difficulty is it goes to maximum power to search for a signal. So now you're in the U-Bahn, everybody has their phone and they're all going to maximum to search for a signal. and you're in a metal-walled environment, so this is bouncing back and forth constantly off your body. You know, the word I use, it may be a word that's new to you, but I like to use it about 5G because I find it very appropriate. Unconscionable. It's beyond outrageous, yeah? Even to think about it. So if you are electro hypersensitive already, or when they roll out 5G and many more people become electro hypersensitive, then when they put up satellites, which they propose to do as of June this year, the word they use is they plan to blanket the Earth. This means that every square centimetre of this planet will be blanketed by 5G beamed from space. So it wouldn't matter whether you were in the middle of the ocean or in the rainforest, in the desert, you would still be blanketed by 5G. So if you're electro-hypersensitive, you would be tortured. And this is what I experienced with my Swedish friend. This is what happened to her in December. So she was in perfect health, a lady, let's say in her early 50s, she had perfect health, very robust, and she started, before the rollout of 5G, sorry, before the official announcement of the rollout of 5G, she started to have very bad pains in her eyes. Then they announced officially that 5G had been rolled out, and in the space of 3 weeks, she went from robust health to literally running away from Austria. She had lived here 30 years, 30. She had lived in this country. And she had to get in her car, leave her home, and leave Austria in the space of 3 weeks. You can buy a meter to measure your exposure to electromagnetic radiation. Unfortunately, the meters that you can buy only measure up to the 4th generation. As I understand it, there are no commercially available meters that you can buy yet that will measure 5G. So I have 2 meters, and I went around with my friend, and when she was in different places, she had different symptoms. Because as I said, 5G is not a single thing. The infrastructure for 5G actually varies. So you will see it manifest in different forms, in different places. So she told me as she moved around, her body was telling her that she was exposed to electromagnetic radiation. And what did her body tell her? Well, it went from stabbing pains in the eyes to stabbing pains in the ears, actually a horrific pain in her rectum, which was intolerable, buzzing internal organs, so it was moving around and buzzing different organs, a feeling of having a heart attack, a tight band around the head, headaches, etc., etc. She had a whole range of symptoms. And she was living just outside Vienna in Niederösterreich. And she found, within a short space of time, she could not come into Vienna. Because although officially the 5G has only been announced at the Rathaus, to my knowledge, it's only been announced at the Rathausplatz and at the airport. In fact, if you are sensitive, as I am, and as she is, your body will tell you where 5G is, because your body is reacting to it. So when I go around Vienna, I scan my body. I pay attention. What is different now? What's happening in my body that doesn't normally happen? So in her case, she quickly found that she could not come into Vienna, and then, but she was okay where she lived, outside Vienna, in Greifenstein. And so as long as she was in Greifenstein, she was fine, and she could sleep. And then one night, she couldn't sleep at all. She was tortured, totally tortured, in her home. And she couldn't understand it, because her home until that point had been okay. So finally she became so frustrated that she went out at night, 10 o'clock at night. Why? Why do I feel like this? And she looked on the street and she found that there were very, very small antennas. Now, we don't know what those antennas are. I've had no answers on this, but it would be very interesting to find out. I have photographs of them, so I know what they are, officially, what they're supposed to be. These are called geophones. They're very small, and the literature that I found said that they were for seismic monitoring. Now these are presumably put out by Wien Energie, because we found one sign on these things which said Wien Energie. And we had two conflicting stories. So one person asked about these in Greifenstein, and the story he was told by the person who was putting them out was that Wien Energie was looking for oil. These go all along the Danube. To our knowledge, these go from the 19th district all the way out to Greifenstein, and they are along the side of the Danube. So exactly where you go for your leisure walk, you have all these little antennas about 100 meters apart, and they tortured my friend. That's all I can tell you. They may not torture you, they didn't torture me, but they tortured her. So they're all along the Danube, and they are all along the roads from Klosterneuburg out to at least Greifenstein and beyond, because we've seen them. So the story this person got when he asked somebody out at Greifenstein was that they were looking, Wien Energie was looking for oil all along the Danube and all along the roads, apparently. And then I've also heard a report from the 22nd district, and this time the person who asked was told that they were looking for water. So I would suggest this is a very big question mark. These are geophones. So please look up geophones. Please keep your eyes open. G-E-O phones. Yeah? So please keep your eyes open, because they're not telling us. They're not telling us the truth about the extent of the rollout of 5G, and they're not telling us what the antennas look like. So we need to pay attention to what we're seeing around ourselves, and we need to pay attention to our bodies to see how they're reacting. So the proponents of 5G announce very proudly that they're going to blanket the Earth. And this again is a word that you will see in all the documentation. You will see this word everywhere. We're going to blanket the Earth with 5G. So one aspect, of course, is the electro hypersensitivity, and also the damage to the environment, which I've already talked about. The environment will be absolutely devastated by this. But there are other issues in relation to these satellites. One is the space debris problem. When I worked at the UN, for several years I worked as an editor, and I was editing the parliamentary documentation of the organisation, and at that time I always edited all the space documents. So in Vienna we have the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and its subcommittees. So for several years I was editing the documents, so I have some familiarity with space law and with the issues of concern relating to the use of the Earth orbits. And the main issue of concern in the Earth orbits is space debris, because we've caused a lot of chaos up there, and you have a lot of space debris, and it's travelling at very high speed, and even a tiny particle travelling at these high speeds can damage another satellite. Now, officially, we currently have officially about 1,700 satellites up there. Elon Musk has permission from the Federal Communications Commission to launch 12,000 satellites as of this June. And it is proposed to put at least 20,000 satellites in space. So we're multiplying the number of satellites by at least 10 and beyond. So what then is going to happen with the space debris problem? Now, space law provides a liability convention. So I think this is Haftung in German. So the liability convention provides that the launching state, or the state that governs the entity that launches a satellite, carries liability for damage caused by that satellite. So for 5G, you have commercial entities that are launching all these satellites. So who is going to be liable for anything, any damage that these satellites cause? I would suggest that a commercial company is not going to be greatly concerned about minimizing space debris if it's cheaper just to leave the satellite or destroy it. So we cannot expect responsibility from these companies. In addition, in order to get these satellites up there, as far as I understand it, these satellites are the size of a small car, and I think I'm right in saying that one rocket launch may carry 2 such satellites. So you're going to be having thousands of rocket launches, and these rockets are going to use kerosene fuel, which is going to produce black soot. And I might mention here that we have recently discovered that Portugal is building a spaceport on the island of Santa Maria in the Azores.
What?
On the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. Why is Portugal building this spaceport? Is it so that all these launches can happen and pollute the island of Santa Maria, but the rest of us won't know about it? So we have to be monitoring what's happening. The rocket exhaust also contains ozone-destroying chemicals, so that's another threat to our environment. The planet. So just as our bodies have a meridian system, so we know, again, this is established, that we are electrical organisms and we have a meridian system. So similarly, the Earth has its own meridian system. The Earth has a global electric circuit. And 5G, transmitting great amounts of power in the ionosphere and the magnetosphere, threatens to upset the global electric circuit. And what happens when you put a lot of power into the ionosphere and the magnetosphere is that it becomes multiplied many times over. So it's much magnified. So again, this is another aspect of 5G where we simply do not know the effect, but it puts in danger the entire planet. The good functioning of our brains. So another extremely dangerous aspect. So I've already covered some of this. There will be base stations every 100 meters in urban areas. So every 3rd to 5th house is going to have antennas outside it. And it's not just urban areas. As I said, they talk about blanketing the Earth. So not only from space, but also on the ground, they also intend to cover all rural areas. So there would be no escape. You know? The difference, another major difference between 4G and 5G is that you, not easily, but you may have some chance of escaping 4G. If you go to a remote area somewhere, if you go to the forest or the mountain, you may be able to escape 4G. But 5G, you will not be able to escape because it will be everywhere. Yes, so it's going to cover every point on the planet. And for the Internet of Things, initially they're talking about connecting billions of objects, but eventually they're talking about connecting trillions of objects. So everything would be connected. So finally, let's look at international law. So in our appeal, you will see that we talk about all the different international treaties and conventions that provide for populations to be protected. And these are international obligations, yeah? And countries have ratified these treaties. But even though this international law provides for the protection of children, provides for the reduction of exposure to electromagnetic fields, that's the International Telecommunication Union, which should be taking care of that. We have international law that's supposed to protect the environment, health, and human rights. We have laws about space activities, or at least we have guidelines about space activities, that they should be conducted responsibly. And last but not least, we have the Nuremberg Code that prohibits, bans experiments on humans without their consent. Nobody knows about 5G. There's been no public debate. Nobody is informed, and nobody has given their consent to be a guinea pig in this huge biological experiment. So there we have it. That's the scary part. So I hope that you now understand that we have to stop this. And I believe that we can stop this. But we're not going to stop it by asking the people who are doing this to stop doing it. I see that it's an agenda. This is very clear because you can see it from the documents that there is an agenda being fed through. I also especially see it in the UN documents. The Secretary General of the UN is very much promoting everything 5G. And there's never a counter-argument. So because it's established that there are no biological effects, it's never even a discussion that there could be a downside to 5G. So nobody is putting the counter-argument. So it's down to us to inform each other, and we have a deadline. What concerns me is that Elon Musk has permission to start launching his 12,000 satellites as of June this year. So we literally have about 14 weeks in which to stop Elon Musk. My personal view is that even if they roll out 5G on Earth, we still have the possibility of going and disconnecting the power from it. You know? We can do something about this. But if they put it in space, once it's there, how are we going to get these satellites removed? So my personal feeling is that the priority is to make sure that we stop the launch of these satellites in 14 weeks' time. So I'm very much focusing on that, and for that reason I do think that the whole situation is extremely urgent. Austria is in the forefront of this. As you know, you have a government which is very much supporting the rollout of 5G, and it is my belief, it is my experience, let's say, that actually the rollout of 5G in this country goes way beyond what has been officially announced. And I say that from the experience of my friend and also from my experience. You know? I can't substantiate that, but that is my feeling. So I believe that the rollout of 5G everywhere is much more advanced than what we have been told. So it is extremely urgent for all of us to take responsibility and do something about this. I woke up to this about a year and a half ago. So I knew about electromagnetic, or the dangers of electromagnetic radiation for some years, and I had a meter. And I knew about the rollout of smart meters in North America because I followed it, and I read the reports about the consequences of the smart meters, the health consequences for people, the house fires. Because of the design of smart meters, they're extremely dangerous and cause fires as well as being dangerous to health. So because I had followed this in North America, when I heard about smart meters coming to Austria, this was, for me, this was November 2017, I was extremely concerned. And I started looking into smart meters in Austria. And then, exactly a year ago, I heard about 5G. And I didn't know what 5G was. But I could see that the smart meters were part of the 5G agenda. So I started trying to find information about 5G. And there was very little information a year ago. So it was actually quite hard to understand what 5G was and what the implications were. And then I heard about a conference in England. So I went to the conference because they were going to talk about 5G. So I educated myself at the conference, and I came back from there, and in December 2015, so even before this happened, in December 2015, I was still working at the UN, and on the ceilings at the UN, they put what are called public access points. So these are Wi-Fi boosters and cell phone, mobile phone boosters. And I saw these, and I was very, very concerned, because a public access point is designed to serve a large public area. But they installed these on very narrow corridors where the staff were working, so not in the conference areas. I mean, they also installed them in the conference areas. But in the conference areas, these were large public areas with very high ceilings. So these things could be justified there. And when I took my meter, I didn't find an excessive problem in the conference areas. But on the corridors, my meter was off the scale. And I was seriously worried about the health implications for myself and for the staff, especially, as I say, because of the metal walls. And I tried to draw the attention of the staff union to this, and also the medical service, and also the people responsible for the welfare of the staff. And nobody knew anything about electromagnetic radiation, so nobody wanted to listen to me. And I said, well, you know, you don't have to listen to me. Call in the biobiology experts so that they can tell you whether this is safe or not. And I was not heard. And so last year, in May, when I came back from the 5G conference that I attended in England, I heard that the Secretary General was coming to the UN and was going to meet with staff. And I decided to tell the Secretary General about the dangers of these devices on the ceiling. I wouldn't have gone and told him if anybody had listened to me, but they didn't. So I went and I told him that there had already been scientists' appeals. I didn't know at the time. I just cited one scientist's appeal from 2017, which is the EMF scientist's appeal. And I told him about the dangers of electromagnetic radiation, and I told him about the dangers of 5G. And you are able now to see this video of this exchange on the internet, and it also exists with subtitles in German. And let's put it like this, I think you will be surprised at the Secretary General's response, because he told me that he knew nothing about this, and he laughed, as if I was a nutcase to be talking about such things, and why would I even talk about it? But what I didn't know at the time is that the Secretary General of the United Nations is an electrical engineer and a physicist, and he taught telecommunications in his early career. I won't comment further, you may draw your own conclusions. After that, because I had talked about the EMF scientist's appeal, I then wrote to the EMF scientist's appeal to tell them that I had told the Secretary General. So he couldn't say he didn't know about 5G because I told him. So I wrote to them and to another scientist's appeal, the EU 5G appeal. And the EU 5G appeal wrote back to me, well, the EMF scientist's appeal wrote back to me as well, but the EU 5G appeal wrote back to me, Professor Nyberg from Finland, and he said, what can you do? Can you help with a new appeal? We need to make a new 5G appeal because we need to talk about space. In the last appeal we didn't talk about space, so we need to make a new one, so can you help? So I said, yeah, sure. I said, you know, when you finish drafting the document, let me know. I'm an editor. I will edit it. And I volunteered to edit this document. Little did I know that 9 months later, this is my full-time unpaid job to work on this space appeal. 5G
it's your mission,
yeah. It's my mission, yes. So I partnered, originally we were 4 people, a lady called Lynn Wycherley, who's a poet and a writer in England, and Professor Nyberg, and later it came to be just Arthur Furstenberg, who is specialised in this area. He's a scientist and has written one absolutely wonderful book on this issue. So he and I have run this 5G space appeal. I have a team around me in Vienna who also give input and support me, and I could not do what I do without the support that I have from my team in Vienna. Attention to this now, and I find it very difficult to get through to them. But on the other hand, with the appeal, we have now reached many, many millions of people. The appeal went viral. The video of my exchange with the Secretary General also went viral. So we've had a lot of coverage. So what I want to say to you is that we are only two people. And we have managed to create this appeal. It's a scientific document. We have over 100 scientific references. So if you like, it's a scientific document, it's a legal document. And it's been a means of educating people. As I said to you, I'm not greatly in sympathy with the idea of an appeal. It suggests that you're giving your power to somebody else. But for me, it's an informational tool. So we tried to make this text as comprehensive as possible so that we could educate people, so that we can empower people. So what I would ask you to do is not just to read the appeal, but to try to internalize this information. If I can do it, I'm a lay person. If I can do it, I'm not a scientist. So if I can do it, everybody can do it, you know. And my contribution was as an editor, and so my work is about making texts very clear. So I think the appeal text is very clear and very understandable. So I would ask you to take responsibility. I think that's what we all have to do now. Each of us, as an individual, needs to take responsibility, needs to understand this information, and needs to start talking to everybody, everywhere, all the time, every day, in a very loving way, because this is very, very scary information. And when I started on this road, I was very scared. Now I'm not scared at all. I've gone beyond it. And the reason is that you go through a process of change. When you first confront this information, you become very frightened because you're talking about the end, potentially, of everything you've ever loved, you know? Your family, your friends, your way of life, your environment. Everything would be, we believe, destroyed by 5G. So of course, it's very, very frightening when you first meet this information, when you first hear this information. But if you can accept it, if you can accept the truth of it, and I would ask you to verify the truth of what we're saying for yourselves. Don't take my word for it. Go and do your research and satisfy yourself about what we're saying. But once you accept the truth of it, then you really only have one choice. If you are faced with the ultimate, dare I say it, but if you're faced with the ultimate problem, which is your own imminent death and the death of the planet and all the people that you love, you only have one choice, which is to stand up and take action. And so, when you stand up and you take action, because you have no choice, that changes everything. So, when you do that, you move beyond fear. And it's fear that makes this world that creates all the difficulties in this world, because people refuse to take responsibility. So I believe that actually 5G is a magnificent gift. I see this problem as a very spiritual problem. Because once people stand up and take responsibility and take action, then it changes the complete paradigm on this planet.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Can I ask you something?
Please.
Are you already in the focus of these people? Because this section, if you want to say it like that, of producing the 5G and producing the whole thing, they have also a kind of a criminal way how to stop people they are interested to work on this object. And I want to know if you are already in the focus of this kind, of this part of the production. I am already in the focus.
Okay.
So that's a very clear question.
Yeah, it's a very clear question. Does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Does it matter? You know, if I'm going to die anyway, it really doesn't matter whether I die running the appeal or I do nothing and I just die when they roll out the 5G.
Okay.
So to me, this is irrelevant.
Very emotional answer. But my question was, if you had already the experience that they had you already on in the focus.
I don't focus on that.
Okay, so you don't want to speak about it?
No.
All right.
Yeah, because
okay.
I don't bring it into my reality. Okay? You see, I am extremely positive about 5G, and also I don't choose to go into conflict with people. I've acknowledged that I know this is an agenda because I did the research for the appeal and I looked at the documentation. So I know it's an agenda. But people say, well, who is doing this? I don't think it matters who's doing it. What matters is stopping it. And I believe that the people who can stop it are the people. So not the people who are behind it. I actually believe that it's a lack of education, it's a lack of information. If the public was informed, the public would stop it. So I believe that's where we have to start, and not start going into conflict with people, because I think that that energy comes back to you. You know? So I don't blame people, and I don't want to attack people. I'm not. It's no reflection on you. You know, I acknowledge that this can happen, of course, but I
don't blame people. Can you make it clear? You don't blame
well, you know, I like to think of 5G as a mistake. Yeah, I prefer to think that somebody's made a very bad mistake.
Yeah,
you know, I'm being very charitable here. I know.
But if they impose the 5G, if they do it anyway, they will find a solution to do it. You have to fight against it.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course,
that's what I believe. We have to fight against it.
And
I don't believe that anybody can impose anything on us without our consent.
No, it's no conflict. I mean, may I translate? Because the name is, ich glaube, Sie meinen, dass natürlich ist es ein Kampf, aber der Kampf kann nicht mit Waffen gekämpft werden, die jetzt auf Angriff gehen. Das heißt, natürlich wissen wir, wer das macht, aber Sie meinen eben, es ist wichtig, dass wir informieren, weil die Menschen werden es stoppen.
Natürlich.
Die Menge der Menschen wird es stoppen und nicht, weil wir jetzt sie bekämpfen, diejenigen, die das machen. Das ist
Yeah. And also, you see, the actual people who are digging the roads, they're digging the roads now to put in fibre cables, and it's ordinary people who have families and children who will be helping to launch the satellites. So these are the people that we need to contact. So I believe that if we go into blame and attack and conflict, we don't reach people. I think we have to do this gently and compassionately, because I think these people genuinely do not understand. I'm talking about the ordinary people who work on this. I think they genuinely do not know, do not realize the implications. So we have to be very compassionate, and we have to explain it to them. So we have to be careful when we approach another person to talk to them about 5G. We need to do that gently and compassionately, and also not frighten people. What I've noticed is that you need to come back several times. Yes, you plant a seed, you give people some information. Take some of our cards, for example, give somebody a card, say, look, you know, here's a little bit of information, it doesn't sound good to me, but take a card, read the appeal, educate yourself and see what you think. Yeah? And then at a later stage you can come back and tell that person a bit more. Or you may find that somebody else will tell that person more, or they'll go onto the internet and find out more. So we need to do it gently, step by step, and plant seeds and come back and water them. So that's what I would recommend. But above all, what I want to say is we need to take responsibility, take action, and be positive. I have always been extremely positive about 5G because I do think it's a spiritual opportunity to make this planet a much, much better place. And I do believe that it is utterly implausible that this can happen. There is no commercial case for this. The consumers have not asked for this. And if you understand that 5G is about big data, and it's about collecting data about every aspect of people's lives, then you understand that 5G is the pinnacle of consumerism. With 5G, the consumer himself becomes consumed because it's the consumer's data. Yeah? So, you know, it's, to me, it's utterly implausible. Yeah? I know they're doing it, I don't deny they're doing it, but I absolutely believe that we can stop it.
Claire, I have a question.
May I interrupt shortly?
Sorry.
Shall we go on now with not interrupting the talk and question and talking? Or shall we make a 10-minute break?
10-minute break.
And then come back with focused mind, what is my question, and we come back together, make a round, maybe around the oven, and talk.
And
discuss. Or shall we move on now, use this energy and go on with the talks?
It could be nice if she explained the solution and then after that we can expose our ideas.
Yes, I would love to hear the solution before we
finish your speech and then
I
say the solution, whatever, and then after we make a break. And
so I think we should take a break because my colleague is going to talk about solutions and our motivation for holding this evening, it was Denise's idea to actually have a think tank. So people say to me, well, what can I do? Well, it's not up to me to tell anybody what they can do, really. I did what I can do. With my background, I did what I'm able to do. Yeah? And it doesn't matter who you are. Yeah? You may speak languages, or you know, you may be working at an old people's home, or sweeping the streets, and you meet people. It doesn't matter who you are. You have to look at your life and your opportunities and see how do you put this into action yourself. And that's entirely up to you. We need artists, we need lawyers to bring cases, we need people to sing about it, dance about it. We need everybody to take action in whatever way is appropriate to them. And the idea is simply to educate everybody. And when people are sufficiently educated and convinced, then they will take action. They will simply not accept it. And that's my purpose. So in my case, I'm an information person. So I bring people information. My background is as a teacher, a linguist, as a trainer, and as an editor. So I very much deal with conveying information to people. But your approach will doubtless be something quite different. So let's take a break. Thank you very much indeed for coming and for listening. and really appreciate being here with you and able to give you this message.